Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Pharaoh and Total War Pharaoh Dynasties. Why did Dynasties succeed where Pharaoh failed? That is the purpose of this video. This is not a review. I think I do need to play a lot more of the game to really give you a review of Dynasties. But with Pharaoh as the baseline game, I called it the worst Total War release in quite a long time, because it was, in a lot of ways. People shouldn't confuse what they're getting in terms of a game experience right now in Dynasties to what we had when it came out. For what it's worth, CA Sophia and CA in general did put in a lot of effort to really improve the gameplay experience and to add more content. But when the game originally came out, it was the most expensive Total War that Creative Assembly had ever really released. Not just because of the baseline price, which was $60 or 60 euros, but because you had various editions which could bump up that price by quite a significant amount. Now, sure, you would get various things, DLCs, etc., but it wasn't really a great deal. And this was combined with the fact that Total War Pharaoh was effectively a saga game in all but name. And people had really soured on the saga games. Troy didn't do so well. Thrones of Britannia didn't do so well, so the whole saga thing, which they abandoned with Pharaoh, had really soured people on these kind of smaller games for many, many reasons. But this was effectively what Creative Assembly was doing, and on top of that, they were doing it with Pharaoh and then removing the saga title, but it felt like they were only removing the saga title just to price it higher. And that sat very poorly for a significant portion of the community. And when you look at various things like, oh, you have skins in this game, that was a benefit that you could, that was a certain benefit that you could have in the baseline game, dependent on the edition you got. Those skins are now available to everyone that just purchases the game or just plays the game. So if you already had it, you now have access to the skins. And if you're buying new, you do also have access to those skins as well, I believe. So that's one of the things, the pricing aspect. On top of that, this was coming right after the disastrous launch of Shadows of Change and the imminent disaster of Hyenas, both of which really soured the community's opinion about Creative Assembly. You know, it says a lot, I think, that Pharaoh right now is around 5,000 to 7,000 concurrent players in the game, dependent on the hour, right? Which is close to a quarter of the number of players that Warhammer Free, for all its content, has. So that is a success story for Dynasties. But at launch, this was the least played game ever released in the Total War series. And right now, there's actually more players, more active players in Dynasties than there were at launch, which is saying a lot about the launch. Furthermore, with respect to this, in terms of the actual content in the game, well, we had performance issues in battles. Now, I haven't noticed them yet. Now, keep in mind, I have substantially upgraded my computer, especially my CPU in the meantime, but I certainly haven't seen the kind of performance issues. So you had battle performance issues specifically, which apparently have been improved. I don't know. Let me know what you guys have seen about that, but to me, it does seem like the game is running better at the moment than it did at launch. So that's another aspect. Another aspect at the launch state of the game is the lack of content, because you had 4 Bludgeoning Lords, 4 factions, when the game came out for Egypt. So you had Amun Mes over here in Nubia and Kush, you had Tosret, Seti, and Ramesses. Then you had 2 Canaanite factions, Irsu and Bay, and then 2 Hittite factions. And that didn't really sit well for a lot of people, because we got basically 8 characters we could play, and that was it. And the map itself was not really that great either in terms of its design. It says a lot about Dynasties that compared to the base game, they didn't really cut anything, or at least anything substantial that I could notice, in the Pharaoh map as opposed to what they had done in, say, Mortal Empires or Immortal Empires. Because, like, you look at Mortal Empires, a lot of regions were removed, a lot of provinces may have been reduced in terms of size or removed altogether. That hasn't really happened with Total War Pharaoh. And also the distances between the settlements was significantly reduced. That is something that happened in Mortal Empires and Immortal Empires. That hasn't happened. And that's just saying something about how small the map felt when the game came out. So again, lack of content, lack of factions to really play, because you had 3 main factions, Egypt, Canaan, and the Hittites. Of course, you had a bunch of smaller factions, but those were the principal ones. So the fact that we now have this much bigger map, like everything over here to the east of Damascus, or east of Irsu, basically, wasn't there in the game before. Everything to the west of Assyrian Phrygia wasn't in the game either. So you have a huge map expansion to begin with. You have 4 more characters to play. So you've added like 50% more in terms of playable factions, and those are just major factions. That's not counting the minor factions that were added in the meantime. Now, of course, I'm not counting the sea peoples, because by that point no one really cared. But even so, there's been a lot of content, a lot of territory, a lot of variety, 4 ancient legacies, 2 courts, various gods, various units. They actually put a lot more effort, it seems like, with the units that came for like the Aegeans or the Babylonians or the Mesopotamians than they actually did in the base game. So that is one of the reasons why Dynasties has done well compared to the baseline game of Pharaoh. Basically, a lot of people felt like they were getting taken for a ride. The content wasn't that great either. But there's more to this particular story. There's quite a bit more. In terms of campaign gameplay, I personally felt like Pharaoh was a downgrade compared to Troy. Because Troy had its issues, but one of the things I liked in Troy was the sheer customization of your economy, because you had various economic buildings, which, a lot of them have been removed and have stayed removed, which is a shame, because you could have various bronze or lumber structures, and you had to choose okay, which one do I go? How do I optimize things? And I felt that was far better than the system we got in Pharaoh. That hasn't really been improved. It's still an issue, though to some extent, some of the buildings that Agamemnon gets, for instance, do help with that in that particular respect. But still a downgrade in that respect compared to Troy. Mind you, Troy had its issues, gold was so dominant that basically, if you could get a gold mine early on in the game, you just completely dominate the game. But Troy did a lot of things, had a lot of great ideas. You look at Gansdorf's, it's based on Troy. And so is this game, of course. But this game should have been a more optimized version of that, a better developed version, and it just didn't really feel like it. In some ways, it still doesn't, I should point out, but with Dynasties, they have improved that. And one of the significant improvements that they've added in Dynasties compared to the base game is with respect to battle gameplay. Lethality. Let me explain why lethality is so important and why exactly they screwed up in terms of the battles. The battles of Troy and Pharaoh felt very bad. The reason they felt bad is because you had a situation where they were we're going to have infantry focused, a variety of infantry units, range units, all that, and we're going to really try and make that work. Or we're going to have different battle layouts, and we're going to try and improve things for that. It didn't work. Flat. It just didn't work. The reason it didn't work is light units meant squad. Basically, the balancing of both Troy and Pharaoh was such that the heaviest infantry units, melee infantry units, would win out. You would do better in auto-resolve, you would do better in manual battles. And that was a problem, because it basically meant that an already limited unit roster was even worse off for it, simply because units that had good armor, good melee damage, and good armor piercing would dominate things. In Pharaoh, this took the form of the Canaanites and Hittites just dominating the Egyptians, because all the things about climate, for instance, or weather mattering in battles amounted to squat. It's Part of the problem is with settlement battles. Now, these issues still do exist to some degree, but one of the things that they have really improved in order to make different types of units far better is the addition of lethality. So lethality is a chance of killing a unit in one hit. And what they've done so great is that various units do have different levels of lethality. So you no longer have a case of heavily armored infantry units with good armor piercing dominating over everything, so clubmen and axemen specifically. Now you have a situation where even lighter infantry units can actually do quite well, where even chariots are in a better situation because of their high lethality. Like an example of this would be like Ramesses' quote-unquote elite army. Well, the problem of Ramesses' quote-unquote elite army is it's expensive, but it was actually crap because, yeah, these guys have no durability. And the benefit, and they don't have the benefit of heavy armor because they're lightly armored units. But now with lethality, while they still will take a significant amount of damage, lethality does balance the playing field because now just being heavily armored is not a winner in battles. It's still an issue in terms of choke point battles, which do happen in settlements, but from the battles I have played, they do feel a lot better. There are plenty of people who picked up Troy, who picked up Pharaoh, played it like half an hour, saw the battles, and were like, fuck that. That's awful. This is one of the principal improvements that they really added. Beyond all the factions, all the terrain, all the maps, the lower price, the fact that we got every bit of content in Dynasties that existed in the base game, so the skins are now part of the base game, that's a great thing. Now, you still have to pay for the Blood DLC, which is like, screw that. From my perspective, like, I've argued against the Blood DLC for years, and long before I even started covering Total War fully on this channel. So that's still crap with the Blood DLC, but it is clear they put an effort compared to the base game. Now, some people are going to have different perspectives on this. From my point of view, yes, you can argue that Creative Assembly never gave them the budget or time to develop it. I understand that. I also think like the people in CA Sophia had really horrible ideas in terms of battle gameplay. That's my perspective. Because you look at some of the decisions, it's not a question of freaking time with some of those decisions. And I think it's also showing what happens when a company has their feet put to the fire. Because this is exactly what's happened in Creative Assembly. To understand how bad it has been in Creative Assembly, they've gone through a significant reorganization as a company. I think they lost 3/4 or at least half their workforce. Like, based on what people have saying, based on people I've talked to in CA, like, a lot of people have been let go. Like, significant number of people. So, numbers are unclear, but they had, like, close to 900 people. They might have, like, 250, 300 people at the moment. So, you know, or 200 even. We don't know. Like, we don't have the current numbers, I think. But, like, some of the people I've talked to have really talked about significant layoffs. Now, part of that is because they hired a lot of people to work on Hyenas. When you look at how many people work on Fortnite, that's the idea. They hired a lot of people because they thought they had the next Fortnite on their hands with Hyenas. Didn't quite work out for them in any way, shape, or form. So they had to let a lot of people go. But reorganization, free disasters one after another. And I think it just shows what can happen when people do criticize a company for doing crap, which Pharaoh certainly was. And I'm glad that Creative Assembly has improved on that. I think, look, I'm going to say this as a content creator, because there's people who you just want to be negative. No, I don't. Like, it never pays off to be negative. It never pays off to be in a situation where the game you're looking to cover doesn't do well. And if you think we control that, that is a laughable notion for any content creator. Like, yes, we have some level of influence, depends on the channel size, but the idea that we are the ones dictating that, no. Flat out, no. And this is the perspective that virtually every content creator I've met has shared with me, really. It's like, from much bigger channels, like 10 times or much larger channels than my own, like, yeah, we have some level of impact, but it's not content creators. So it's good to see a step in the right direction. I do feel there are further things that Creative Assembly could do with Pharaoh, and I do hope that they do. because they have improved a lot. They added a lot, and they've gotten a lot of people. So I think right now, what they should do going forward is keep developing, improve the economy, improve the campaign mechanics. Myth units would be a welcome addition, all that. Various mechanics, more ancient legacies. Maybe being able to have multiple ancient legacies at the same time would be a great thing. Like just more variety in campaign, right? More choices, more consequences, etc., etc. Better campaign customization options as well. But I do think Pharaoh is in the right direction at the moment with Dynasties. And I'll be honest, I think, like, I'll say this much. I was surprised, to some extent, at the level of animosity people had towards Pharaoh when it came out. Like, I didn't expect it to do well. But pre-launch, I was doing polls where, like, 90% of people were saying, I'm not interested in Pharaoh. That is what? That is exceptional. Like, I understood, like, a lot of people are not going to be interested. But that was a bit much from my perspective. And I also admit that I am quite surprised as to how many people, and I'm sure CA is as well, based on what I know at least, CA probably is surprised. I certainly am surprised by how many people are playing it right now. Certainly certain other content creators are surprised, and well, don't miss the train because there might be a lot more people joining to play Pharaoh if they keep developing it. And I do certainly hope they do, but we'll see what they decide to do. Like, this might be, their Hail Mary. It might pay off. They might develop more content, or they could focus on other projects. We will see on that subject. Costin, signing out. Stay tuned for more.